Okay, this talk is what is the best bean to eat? Okay, there's a couple different ways to look at it. Um, First of all, I like to eat things that are low in fat. I think the lower your dietary fat, the better that you can achieve with a naturally occurring diet. And so, right from the get go, I don't like soybeans because they're about 40% fat. That's like way high fat. Forget about it. Next highest fat in beans is garbanzos, about 13%. 13% is reasonable. I still would prefer eating a lower fat bean, but 13% is reasonable. Garbanzo beans, also called chickpeas, they taste pretty good. Sorry about the dogs. There's, people over upstairs and the dogs are barking. Um, Green beans and peas, pretty good at about 5% fat. Black beans, 4% fat. Lentils, I think, are best. They're only about 3% fat. Those are pretty similar numbers, 3 and 4% fat. Not a big difference there. I think lentils taste a little better. I mean, all the different lentils, I find them taste good. Green lentils, red lentils, yellow lentils. So, as far as fat's concerned, lentils, black beans, and whatnot in that ballpark, 3 to 4%, I think are the best. A couple other thoughts on beans. I'm really not a big fan of soy. It's got so many problems. I know it gets hyped all the time. There's almost like peer pressure. You have to praise it. I don't buy it. The GMO, who knows the significance of that? I would never eat a non-organic soy. I would never eat soy in general. Herbicides a lot with the GP and all the problems with that. There's an entire book on that subject, Toxic Legacy by Senef, if you're curious about it. The hexane solvents, introduce other potential problems and side effects. Very high in phytoestrogens, like 10,000 times higher than most other foods. Flax seeds even higher, but still, soy's got a lot of phytoestrogens, and the significance of them is not exactly clear. People will tell you they only activate the good receptor, not the bad receptor. But I looked at the paper, and it activated the bad one about it just as much as far as I could tell. Anthony J, he's a PhD biochemist specializing in lipids, and he came to the same conclusion on that one. Possible goitrogenic, hypothyroidism inducing type effects. I've made other videos on soy if you're curious about that, so I'm not going to say much more about it today. A little more, not much more. Canned beans have too much salt. So the other thing I worry about, anything in a can, you can potentially get a little bit of aluminum get into the food. They tend to have a plastic BPA lining, bisphenol A, which is quite estrogenic, and that'll often potentially tear a little bit and get some BPA into the food. So, don't get me wrong. Canned beans might save your life if you're starving and that's all you've got saved up to eat. But unless I was starving, or if I travel, they might be convenient to bring with you when you travel. But, I never travel. Nobody invites me anywhere. Canned beans are good for storage. So that's about the deal on canned beans. What about flatulence? As you get used to the beans, you're less likely to have flatulence. You get used to all the fiber. Your gut bacteria adjust to it. Dan Buettner of the Blue Zones believes that beans are like the healthiest food in the world. And he says all the Blue Zones, those are populations with the most persons over 90 or 100 that are physically fit, mentally sharp, still healthy. And he thinks that that's the key, one of the key unifying features of all the Blue Zones. They all ate about 95% or more plant-based. He used to say 95 plant-based, but percent of their calories plant-based, but now he says it's only about 90%. So he sort of changed what he says. But for what it's worth, Buettner thinks beans are one of the cornerstones of all the Blue Zone centenarian type populations. Beans are very high in protein. But even though they're very high in protein, typically anywhere in the range of about 25 to 32%, they tend to be relatively low in methionine given the amount of protein they have. But still, because they've got all that protein, they're still going to have a lot more methionine than some other food that's much, much, much lower in protein. For cooking them, all the people who cook for me or with me, they all just boil them. They don't do anything else. I don't even think they necessarily always soak them. Okay, a couple more thoughts on beans. Soybeans, like I said, have about 38% of the calories from protein. That's extraordinarily high. That's like a meat. Look at the soybeans in that ballpark of 40% of the calories from fat and 38% of the calories from protein. Those are numbers very similar to a meat, and that might be why they're used so often to make veggie burgers. They got a lot in common with meat. They also increase insulin-like growth factor. They also have a lot of iron in them. They got the most iron of any of the beans by far, and I don't want that. Men start becoming iron overloaded in Western countries after 20 years of age. Women, once they stop menstruating, after 50 years of age, and excess bodily iron stores can lead to increased oxidative stress and predisposition to other oxidative stress related problems. That gets into the whole Douglas Kell, PhD, Escherichia Pretorius, PhD, School of Dormant Bacteria, and all that stuff. I don't want to get into all that, but I'm just letting you know, you want your iron levels lower, not higher. Almost all people do. I even donated blood once to get my ferritin levels down lower. And by not eating anything high in iron, they'll gradually come down. But we're really slow to lower our iron levels because we're not designed to have high iron levels. And we don't naturally excrete it in any significant way. But they'll gradually come down if you just minimize your dietary intake of it. It's the heme iron in particular from meat that we can't control the absorption rate so well. For the plant iron, we're better at controlling it. And just to be fair to soybeans, T. Colin Campbell in his book, The China Study, mentioned that when they fed the 20% protein from gluten, wheat protein, or 20% protein from soy, it did not induce increased cancer in his rodent animal population. So it was definitely a lot safer than was animal protein. The casein in particular he could just switch casein up to 20% and induce activation of liver cancer in mice that had aflatoxin exposure, it's a liver carcinogen, or that had been infected with hepatitis B virus. Okay, what are some other points about this? The amount of protein in garbanzos, black beans, kidney beans, navy beans was all pretty similar, 22 to 27%. So that's actually better than what you're getting with lentils. I tend to like lentils the best because they taste really good and they're really low in fat. But I'm not thrilled about them being especially high in protein at about 31%. And I'm in the process, I've been doing this over time, trying to eat less beans and, more potatoes, sweet potatoes. And I even eat my rice. I've got pretty good rice, I think, and I feel good after eating the rice. And I know a lot of real nice, smart, healthy people that are eating a lot of rice still. So I think, don't get me wrong, I'm aware of the whole arsenic business, but I think that rice, the rice has gotten more negative hype than it deserves from what I can see. And that's also been Dr. McDougall's experience. He worked for many, many years in California, a state where people eat tons of rice. And he said he never saw not one single case of arsenic toxicity. Is there maybe subclinical arsenic problems? Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. And actually the mechanism of arsenic toxicity is rather interesting, and I'll talk about that in the future. There's some interesting things about it. I gave a previous lecture on arsenic, but I'll probably do another one in the future because there's some interesting things about it that haven't really been widely spoken about. So overall, I think beans are a decent food, but I still have not answered the question, where do you want your protein to be in terms of your percentage of calories? Kempner had the patients down around 4.4%. The Asian-based rice diets, the Papua New Guinea, they had really low protein. And some people will say, well, they're two totally different issues. T. Colin Campbell, as far as he's concerned, animal protein is, the devil, the real problem, because it's he doesn't specifically emphasize the methionine, but the methionine and leucine levels being higher, it activates mTOR more. And he pointed out that you didn't get nearly the same amount of problem with soy or gluten protein. But there's other people like James H. Mitchell, PhD, that Harvard researcher who gave some lectures with the Wilhelm Buchinger Clinic on the internet on YouTube. And he's a big proponent. He says you want to lower your total protein as much as possible. And while animal protein might be worse than plant protein, it is. He felt lowering total protein was a big benefit. So how do you reconcile that with the high amounts of protein in beans? I'm not sure of the answer to that. And I calculated all the numbers out of my own personal diet, the Spartan vegan diet, so to speak, and I was eating in the ballpark of about 10% protein. I try to keep it below 10%. I don't think about the numbers precisely. I just make sure I'm eating other things. Like I'll get a lot of my calories from the potatoes, the rice, the blueberries, and whatever other fruits available, the watermelon, the bananas, etc. So anyways, hope that's helpful. And for me, the big insight that I learned when I was studying beans was that the lentils were so low in fat at 3%, and the black beans and a lot of other beans were pretty low as well at around 4%, but that the garbanzos were kind of high at 13%, and the soy was super high. So I hope that's helpful.